remember. So welcome everyone to the kickoff of this year's Helping STEM Students Thrive session. I'm Patrice Presco, and I'm currently the Associate Director of Learning, Design, Technology, and Media at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And this is the third year that I've been doing this collaboration with University at Buffalo, and I would like to especially thank Becky Burke and Letitia Thomas for their collaboration over the last few years on this. And on behalf of the Women in STEM Cooperative, I would just like to thank everyone for joining us and help us to expand participation of women in STEM education. And today's session, we are going to talk about a topic that I'm sure many of you have been thinking about, experiencing, and talking about, and that is burnout and work-life balance. And we have three wonderful speakers here to share some of their experiences, research, and to talk a little bit about strategies you might use to help with burnout. And with that in mind, though, we always hope that these sessions will be interactive. And I would just ask everyone to mute their audio also if they're not speaking. So we really hope this session will be interactive, and so please feel free to either raise your hand if you would like to ask a question or post it in the chat box. And then Becky will help me with monitoring the chat box if anyone has questions or if any issues come up. And to share just a little bit about this series, as I said, it's the third year that we've been doing this, and we have over 140 of your colleagues registered for these sessions, representing 56 institutions of higher education, 8 businesses, and people from 4 countries, 1 territory, and 25 states. So we have a pretty broad range of people who are participating in these sessions. And with that, I'd like to introduce our 3 speakers. Our first speaker is Tanya Justin, and she's Senior Scientist and Director of the Digital Learning Research and Development and National Research Center for Distance Education and Technological Advancements, and advisor to the Provost for Innovation Products at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And I'm thrilled to have Tanya here with us today, and we've known each other for several years and podcasted together, and so it's great to have her joining us. And we will also hear from Catherine Cook-Catone, who is an educator, author, yoga teacher, and psychologist. And she's a professor in the Department of Counseling, School, and Educational Psychology at the University at Buffalo, where she teaches courses on mindful therapy, yoga for health and healing, self-care and service, eating disorder prevention and treatment, and counseling with children and adolescents. And we're really lucky to have a student with us today to share a little bit of her experiences and her story. And Lauren Hay is a PhD student at the University at Buffalo, and she is working in getting her PhD in elementary particle physics. That's correct, right? And so with that, we're going to start the conversation with Tanya. And to kick us off, if you could just, I did a brief introduction, but if you could just tell us a little bit more about the work that you do. And I know recently you and I were talking a little bit about burnout and some of the experiences that we were having and some of the research and things that we've been thinking about.
Yeah, so I actually study organizational science is one of the areas. Obviously, for my title more recently, I've been doing a lot of work around digital learning and launching the Research Center for Distance Ed and Tech Advancements. But like 20 years ago, starting graduate school, I studied stress and burnout and emotion labor and all of those things. I've studied with Sarah Tracy, who's one of the scholars in the area of emotional labor. And teaching that, you teach about all of these things and so forth. But it's interesting how much you can study something and teach it in your classes, and yet still, as a lot of us do, end up in situations where we're not managing our stress well, or we're just stressed out, and we experience burnout. And I think as we are in this situation, women in general in STEM and in higher ed, we have certain things that we are trying to manage and different pressures. And so with the pandemic and with the fight for racial equality and all of these things going on. I just was, I think it was like late July. When I have meetings with people, I like to use the first 5 or 10 minutes to sort of give space for an emotional check-in. This is something the old Tanya would never do because I was completely logical and thought, who needs time for emotions? Let's pack those away somewhere. But now this Tanya was like, hey, let's sort of have, a check-in here. And it was like every woman I was talking to that week and every meeting was telling me, I'm struggling. I'm really having a hard time, kids home, all of these sorts of things, lots of different household responsibilities and focusing on career and trying to keep work productivity up or anywhere. And so I just started thinking like, this is, how many women just in 1 week, colleagues that I had met with were struggling, were expressing to me the stress that they were experiencing. And literally were at sort of like an end of their rope. Like, I'm not sure how much longer I can do this. And it's interesting because then I had reached out to Patrice because we both have had conversations around the area of stress and burnout and manage that. And Patrice and I have created a network with each other to support each other through those stresses and be able to share those experiences. And that social support network is, one strategy that you can develop with people who understand your work. I have friends, they have zero clue what I'm talking about when I talk about my work, And so it's nice to have friends and colleagues that are in this sort of mix of STEM and higher ed so that they understand some of the different things that you're dealing with because other folks might not necessarily understand the pressures and so forth. So Patrice and I were just talking about, that this is a time for us to really understand better how women experience stress in higher ed. And I think from a feminist paradigm, or when you think about organizational models, it's really highlighting sort of the patriarchal structures in our organizations because, for the most part, higher ed was built by men for men, although I know there's some anomalies out there. And I think that extra stress from those organizational structures are just sort of really being highlighted right now as we're juggling multiple roles and there's multiple societal factors that are influencing us every day. I just was tweeting about sort of, I feel like I'm having this, and I tweet about this often, like it's this huge emotional dissonance, right? Like right now I'm supposed to chime in and be happy and like, hey guys, let's talk about stress and burnout. And there's the other part, it's like, I might've just been crying yesterday, about, I don't know, the election or, the protests that we still are having in Milwaukee every day. And so it's just interesting that, we have all of these things going on. And sometimes, in the org sciences, they'll talk about managing these things and so forth. And there's a point though, where maybe it's not about managing these things. Maybe it's about just living through them and experiencing them. So anyways, that's sort of how Patrice and I started talking about this a few months ago. So it was interesting that this sort of opportunity arose to be a part of this panel.
Yeah. And just to remind everyone, if you have any questions, to please raise your hand or put them in the chat. So I know one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot and hearing a lot from colleagues is, especially people in support roles, is the unexpected emotional labor and compassion fatigue they're experiencing as they're working, if they're like in a role like instructional designer, for example, supporting faculty and thinking about students, and that this, so there's like an added weight that people are taking on. And I think from the faculty side, they are also finding that in addition to teaching content, they need to be thinking about being a support system for their students. And so wondering for Tanya or anyone in the audience is if you've experienced that, or you have any strategies for how you're navigating things like that. And I think I've found that, yes, like a support system and finding just other people who you can talk with and go to when you're struggling has been extremely helpful.
Yeah, it's interesting that the people that you're talking to are expressing that. I think that there's people are experiencing multiple things. And one of my things, and it's sort of like a double-edged sword, right? Like I was thinking something I wanted people to hear was that we should have empathy and perspective taking. And it's something I've really tried to build into my courses as part of the learning objectives. Is teaching my students. Of course, I teach in the Department of Communication. These are very much about social sciences. And that's just sort of part of it, right? And Wiggins and McTeague have these great learning objectives around empathy and perspective taking. And it's something I've really tried to do as a colleague and as a mother. But what's interesting though, is that that also is a lot of emotional energy then that I am not like normally, like I wasn't even aware that I had emotions until probably 10 years ago. I was like a pretty 99% logical person. I don't know if it was the socialization of my childhood or what it was, but emotions were just something that we didn't necessarily deal with. We compartmentalized them. And I think that academia encourages us as women to continue to compartmentalize those and to take on more masculine traits. And so it's interesting that I feel at this time there's a lot of people that aren't having empathy towards their students and or each other. And so we end up in these situations where you see messages that were shared that are really insensitive to somebody being sick or somebody experiencing something in their life that they need a little compassion and they're not getting it. But at the same time, providing that as an instructor or as a colleague or peer, that comes down to emotion labor. If we think of, Hochschild in the 70s, the managed heart. And emotion labor, it takes its toll. And so it is sort of, yes, we need to have compassion and care. And I think what Patrice has identified is that some roles within our universities have higher degrees of that expectation. And I think at the same time, there are some folks that are not showing compassion. And I can understand that as someone who struggles to create opportunities for empathy and perspective taking, it also becomes a burden in some ways. Because now I'm thinking about what everybody is going through. And I'm so concerned about everyone's experience in a meeting and the other hurdles that they're dealing with. And it's hard sometimes to focus on the logical task or on work-related things because of this. So I know lots of other people have solutions about managing. I think right now I'm just situated in living the experience and how other people live it.
And I know the other thing I mean, I've been somewhat joking about lately is I've never been so happy that my 3 children are all grown up. And for a while, both of my daughters were living with me, and I finally referred to them as my support staff, which I joked about. But the reality was, while I was locked in my office from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., they would bring me lunch, they would bring me snacks. So it really did make a difference. But I know I have several people on my team and colleagues, and I know you, Tanya, who are trying to also balance having their children home or remote learning, and that's been an added strain, especially on women and women in STEM. And there's been a number of articles, not just around burnout, but the inability to publish, to do research, and that women are
Yeah.
really falling behind.
Yeah, I think overall, I've noticed it as well as just your work productivity. We got here as women in STEM because of our high work productivity. I think that, when that work productivity is taking a hit, whether for a lot, for me, which started leading down my path of burnout was, becoming a wife, becoming a parent, still trying to keep my work productivity up at a certain level and another, series of things. And next thing you know, you burn out. I have several friends who have as well, some who've never went back to work because that's how severe the burnout was that they experienced. And some of them who are slowly, after a few years, working their way back into some sort of working situations. I think now, as a single parent with a child at home, it's very interesting in trying to balance that. So I have to be a virtual coach, I have to be her learning peer, but I also have all of my other tasks. This is a global pandemic. I am an expert in computer mediated communication and digital learning. So the demand is high. It's just like crazy. Like every day that I can survive, I mean, that's really my goal every day, is like, let's survive, and let's nourish our bodies in some way. That might not be societal's expectation of what breakfast, lunch, and dinner are supposed to look like. But let's just set the standard at something that's that we can reach, rather than stressing ourselves out with some metrics that society has developed about how things are supposed to look or how things are supposed to be. But I think that's gotten me to, and I was tweeting about this morning too, is just about your organizational culture. I have been talking and hearing about cultures of care. Does your department or does your university have a culture of care? In all honesty, I'm not seeing enough of that from my university. From the provost office to, in which I work, I do see some of that and supporting me. But I feel like organizations and units in themselves could do a ton more to shift the organizational culture at this time to really support the female colleagues, that are having to take on multiple roles. And because of social distancing, I can't have any help. It's just my daughter and I for months. So I don't have childcare or tutors or people to help with housework or any of those sorts of things. And I think it's sort of that more collectivistic approach that we have to create in cultures of care in our units and organizations. Like, we're sort of in it together. Let's see what we can do. So for example, I'm trying to schedule meetings later in the day. And so everyone's been really great with that. Even at night is better for me, but in the mornings we have school. And so I'm already trying to work and keep track of her and so forth. So it's very something as simple as more flexible scheduling, being a little bit more flexible with deadlines or expectations at this point, I think that people can do. And again, when we talk about organizational cultures, especially in academia and in STEM, they tend to be built off of competitive models, right? Who can publish in what journals? We have clocks that we are working against. And so I think at this point, we really need to sort of think differently about what do we want the culture of our organizations to be. And it doesn't mean that we have to decrease the rigor or decrease the knowledge that's created, but we could just think differently about it. And it actually might be better.
Yeah, and I think in thinking about organizational culture and culture of care, I think one of the tensions that I've seen, and I would love to hear like from other people who have experienced this being done well, is a culture of care on paper versus truly being a culture of care. And I've seen a tension where, the expectation and the need is working almost 24/7 to support the, transition to online. And then leadership may be talking about a culture of care. We encourage you to take time off, to take breaks for self-care, but people are finding it difficult to actually, it's almost like the hidden curriculum. Like, people are finding it difficult to actually take that time. And in some ways that creates a, an added layer of stress. So it is, it's complex.
It's very complex. And we talked about that previously, because I felt like, I was talking with one of my colleagues, Lindsay Harness, about this, because she's like, well, self-care is an invitation for self-care. And I was like, oh, and I trying to prioritize myself. And then all of a sudden I started feeling a lot of pressure. Like, are you self-caring every day? If not, you're a bad person. There's a metric for how you self-care. There's all of these things you need to do and buy. Of course, it's my own perspective. And I just was stressed out in general because of the other 50 balls I'm juggling. And now I have to do self-care well. And it always takes me back to like the 80s commercial, like Anjali, like, I can bring home the bacon, cook it up in a pan and look sexy for my man or something.
Mm.
And I feel like, well, at least we've gotten over that hurdle, some of us. But now it's like, okay, now I have to, I'm not bringing anything home because I'm at home, but I'm still making the bacon and I'm still cooking it. We don't really eat bacon, but anyways. And then, and then now I have to go self-care. Like now I have to yoga or something. And all of those things are great strategies, but at some point it can become an additional stressor. And so to remember that it's always an invitation to care for yourself. And I just was typing to Becky and work on prioritizing. But it's just, for me, sometimes it's one more thing. Now I should mention I'm a workaholic that burnt out about 10 years ago, and I'm in recovery from burning out, and I still am not doing great at it, but I'm trying.
All right, well, thank you, Tanya. I think we'll transition now to Lauren to hear a little bit about her experience as a student. And again, if anyone has any questions, please raise your hand or put them in the chat.
Okay, and I do have slides. It admittedly helps me stay on track. I know we're all sick of seeing slides in Zoom meetings, so please forgive me. I tried to make them look kind of nice.
You should be able to share your screen.
Yep, yeah. I'm just gonna get to the, there we go. So everyone can see this, right?
Yep.
Okay, wait, let me minimize all of your faces. Oh, I may have to take a second. Wait. Okay. Now we're good. Okay. So I really like, so I'm Lauren Hay, and I wanted to start with this quote, "We are tired," which was the name of a march that I was going to attend that ended up getting canceled. And I think that that is very emblematic of burnout within academia and in the activism community. We named a march, "We are tired," and then we had to cancel that march. So anyways, a little more information about who I am. I'm 24 years old. I'm a third-year physics PhD student. I specialize in experimental particle physics, high energy experiment, or it's otherwise called elementary particle physics. A lot of names for the exact same game. I specifically work on the CMS experiment at the Large Hadron Collider, and my projects currently include software development, applying machine learning to high energy physics applications. And I'm also currently preparing my topic defense, which is going to be a novel measurement of quark jet mass, but still in the works. So, and that was a lot of jargon that I just threw at you. So don't worry if you didn't really understand it. Another part of my multifaceted self is that I'm a born and raised Buffalonian. I went to UB for undergraduate. I stayed here for graduate school. And I'm also an active member of our local activist community. You can see in the picture, the lowest picture on this slide, that's me with my bike, with my fellow bikers in a group that we've founded called Wheels of Dissent, where we provide traffic support for marches. And the last thing about me is I just want to add that I'm your typical granola white person. I love hiking, climbing, biking, being outdoors in any kind of way. So to get into a little bit more of my story over the past 6 months, COVID and the uptick in racial justice activism has really crowded my plate. I was actually supposed to move to Switzerland to physically be at my experiment, which you can see in this picture on this slide, in May. That's been postponed until at least February. But then last week I heard that maybe I could leave like next month. So there's this constant back and forth of, not knowing when I'm actually going to be leaving this country, if at all. And then also trying to keep track of my activism and my research work and continue to have an apartment and a lease because I need a place to live. But am I leaving that place? Who knows? So just what I want to share about burnout and the current situation is that things will fall off of your plate. So for example, moving has fallen off of my plate. I was supposed to defend my topic before I moved. I haven't even finished defending it yet. We only filed the paperwork this past September. All of my hobbies that I mentioned have pretty much been neglected for the past 6 months. You know, my weekends, instead of being dedicated to hiking and working out, are now dedicated to going to marches or organizing, or sending emails about. Another thing that I didn't mention is that I also founded a social justice committee in the Physics Graduate Student Association to address, you know, in social injustices within our department, because, you know, like even a few weeks ago, there was an email that went around that was targeting master's students and saying that they're all rich and they don't deserve as many scholarships as the rest of us. And, you know, I sent an email back out saying that's completely unacceptable for you to have said and then circulate throughout this department. So yeah, so like I said, the weekends where I used to have hobbies are now dedicated towards everything else that is still on my plate. And so of course things will fall off. Another one of my colleagues shared this anecdote with me of, in life you're juggling, it's just that some of your balls are plastic and some of them are glass, and you can drop the plastic ones, you just have to try to make sure and not drop the glass ones. And then getting a little bit more into my activism work, just in general, for any of you who are in activism work or who have students who are in activism work, social justice work is prone to burnout, period. If you're a white person in social justice work, along with all of the responsibilities that you've taken on to show up with your feet on the pavement and to contact, you know, people in government to address these issues, you are also on a journey of introspection about your role in systematic racism. And if you're a person of color activist, you're constantly being reminded of the harm that you and your community have endured because of our system of racism. So I hope that my story on being a PhD student and being involved in activism has given you kind of an idea of like what some of your students may be coping with, and also an idea of, you know, how I've been coping with it, which is really, you know, similar to what Tanya said. What comes down to it is having a support system around you. I'm very lucky to have a very, you know, empathetic advisor who is happy to see me active in this social justice work and within our own department. In the activist community, we're becoming aware that the entire like group is just prone to burnout. The action itself is prone to burnout. And also, I mean, I admit I have a therapist. Therapy is great. It's very helpful. And then what helps me to keep going is to recall the high points of activism work in research. So in research, even this machine learning paper that we wanted to get out in September, and which we're in the last few days of finally getting out, we're still just so excited whenever we see those final plots that, you know, it keeps us from getting really down on the fact that we missed our self-imposed deadline. And again, with activism work, you have to remember, you have to think about all of the relationships that you've created and all of the people that you have helped. And it really helps when people say to you, like, you have helped me by speaking out in this way. So also let's remind ourselves to, you know, thank those around us for helping. And then, so I see this question from Patrice. What am I hearing from other students? In what ways are they being supported? So you're right, I am very lucky to have a very supportive advisor. And I think it would be well known within my department that he is one of the most active in diversity and inclusion. And not everyone's advisor is that way. So I think what I'm hearing from other students is when you know that your advisor is not going to be as open to you complaining, you're really not going to do that, and they really aren't going to do that, which is sad. But we've all been relying on each other more so, you know, making Zoom calls and, you know, putting in the effort to make game nights and things like that to really be a support system for each other. And yeah, other students are just as stressed out and do feel the same kind of block in productivity that I am and that I'm sure we all are feeling. So then finally, my last point is that we all really have to forgive ourselves for, you know, having things fall off the plate. It's going to happen in this climate. And, you know, I feel like as women or as minorities in STEM, you feel so pressured that you have to go above and beyond what everyone else is doing, but you have to forgive yourself when you are not reaching that goal that you have set for yourself. We have to realize that we're all being a little unrealistic with ourselves. And then finally, I just want to share some statements, and then we can talk about them later if you feel so inclined. Some of them are kind of provocative. They're supposed to make you think. Some of them are enlightening or will make you hopeful. So I'm just going to read these quotes and then I'll be done. And thank you for listening to me. Yeah, exactly. We need to be careful of our winning mentalities. Okay, so the first is this. There's going to be quite a few quotes from Paul Gorski. He does a lot of work in activism burnout, which is really what I've been focused on in this talk. So activists have this sense of urgency about dismantling these huge systems of power. And when that comes up against how slow change can be and all the barriers that pop up along the way, it can cause burnout. I found that burnout seems to come from the same place that drives people to be activists in the first place. And here's another one. Roughly half the activists who reported experiencing burnout didn't take time off or go on hiatus. They left their movements for good. Here's another one that I think is very important. A lot of the racial justice activists of color we interviewed were pointing to white activists as one of their primary sources of burnout, dealing with the attitudes and behaviors of white allies. In every activist campaign, there's a human element. Whether or not you succeed, you've formed relationships, strengthened connections, and you'll take those to your next effort. And finally, I think this is the most important, and a message that I just want to give you all as people within academia. And Ann Nelson is a great person. This is linked within these slides, and I'll share these slides, the article that she wrote. Let me be clear, if your career is established and you are not making an explicit and continual effort to encourage, mentor, and support all young physicists, to create a welcoming climate in your department, and to promote the hiring of diverse faculty members, you are part of the problem. Okay, that's everything. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I don't know whether we want to do a breakout room or just wait until the end if people have more questions.
Does anyone have any questions for Lauren? Okay, so maybe we'll transition to Catherine, and then we are going to do some breakout rooms, and so people can have some discussions there. So thanks so much, though, Lauren. That was great, and I really appreciate the forgiving myself. I think that's should be a takeaway for everyone today. Yeah, we're not hearing you, Catherine.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I was like, so I was just saying I deleted a whole bunch of slides on burnout and just started right here because I think we already have that taken care of. I want to point to the slides that are just kind of the pictures that are capturing what we're experiencing right now in 2020. And I think a big part of what's happening is, although uncertainty is always part of life, that uncertainty has become part of every day. And on the other side of that, so has certainty. Like, I'm not leaving my house. I'm going to do the same thing I did yesterday, right? And when is it going to end? And what is the budget cut coming next? And what are my kids going to have to do? Or what support am I going to lose? And then we have isolation from everyone, right? At the same time, no alone time, right? So even now, like, I'm trying to find spaces to do webinars that aren't taken up by someone, yet I'm very isolated at the same time. And then everything is going through a filter. So this kind of lack of touch and connection, one of my students called it really like touch starved that we're experiencing. So I want to just start and just take a pause and do 30 seconds of mindfulness, just to get a sense of what I'm talking about. So if you could press both feet into the floor. So if you have your legs crossed, uncross them and find the floor with your feet. And your feet in your shoes, or slip your feet out of your shoes and just feel the groundedness beneath you. And then press your sitting bones into your chair. So you have a sense of connectedness to your feet, a connectedness in your chair and your sitting bones. And then from there, begin to engage your core so that you can lift up through the crown of your head, and then soften your shoulders and soften your jaw. And if it feels okay for you, you can soften your gaze or close your eyes. And then simply turn your awareness, your mind's eye, and maybe to your heart, just towards your breath. Just towards your breath. And then on your next inhalation, we're going to extend the inhalation to 4. So breathing in 1, 2, 3, 4, and breathing out 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Breathing in 1, 2, 3, 4, and breathing out 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Last one, breathing in 1, 2, 3, 4, and breathing out 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then just bring your awareness back to your regular breath. Feeling your breath move in and out, and maybe even noticing your heartbeat. Sometimes I'll place both of my hands on my chest and just feel the heartbeat. And then one big breath in and a big exhale. One more big breath in and an exhale. And then slowly lift your gaze. And just checking into what that feels like in your body. And I think I took more than 30 seconds, but not long, not long. And noticing what happens with your nervous system and your body. And so begging the question, what does it mean to be a mindful professional? It's derived from the concept of mindfulness is just simply paying attention to what's happening. So no extra time required, really, right? It's just an orientation toward the noticing. Now, sometimes I'll joke, like, I'm noticing that we're all falling apart right now. Right? There's even like a little, and then there's room for laughter, right? Then there's like this space, a sense of not being lost. The other aspect that's really critical is curiosity, that comes to everything. Like, I wonder. I think, like, I want life to be wonderful. How could I do that? You bring wonder. And as scientists, we're already wonderful. Like, we are filled with questions, right? So Rilke says, be patient toward all that's unsolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves. So taking this orientation that we bring to our work and just bring it, like we're so living questions all the time. So it's, with the uncertainty, right? Just orienting toward, I'm going to live some questions, and maybe way more questions than I thought I might getting into 2020. And then the last part, and this is that forgiving the self-compassion, the like not needing to be perfect, like in the mess of it all, loving kindness. So the way that we orient toward our lives is just this sense of loving kindness and self-compassion, Sharon Salzberg says. And we can begin to like go over expectations, how life and those we love should be, especially now when we have nothing to look back on in history. And then looking at it with a sense of urgency, that there is a self-care imperative, that no matter what the challenges we confront, there's no escaping the reality, no matter what others or we try to say about it. If we don't care for ourselves, we won't be able to care for others. It's that simple, and it's that important for you, for others, and for our planet. The idea is that if we don't orient our self-care toward the like, I don't know, the embodiment, right? Our own bodies, we can't give what we don't have. And we become so oriented out here in the family and the culture and our expectations at work that we self-abandoned. And then there's nothing here to offer out there but depletion, right? The burnout. And then we quit, right? It's not sustainable. So this is one of my favorite poems from Rumi. This is how a human being can change. There's a worm addicted to eating grape leaves, and suddenly he wakes up. Call it grace, whatever, something wakes him. And he's no longer a worm. He's the entire vineyard and the orchard too, the fruit, the trunks, a growing wisdom and a joy that doesn't need to devour. So when we orient toward ourselves, when we start to nurture ourselves to come from and through and of the body, we aren't doing the things like, I deserve these 3 glasses of wine. I deserve this. Like, we're not consuming as some kind of reaction to the depletion that we have out there. We're consuming for nourishment. So the Merleau-Ponty, philosopher of the flesh, I am not in front of my body, I am in my body. Or rather, I am my body. And so it's not actually something I can abandon. It's still there, even if I try to pretend it's not. And so most of my work comes from the notion of embodiment, the definitions here, but it's essentially embodying the internal and the external. And then I've heard it through Lauren and Tanya, the existential, like, why am I here? Like, what am I up to? And it's the why that keeps us going. And so in my work, I've tried to develop a model that's sustainable, that's possible, that's accessible, that isn't a mandate, that isn't an expectation, it isn't some kind of effort towards perfection or appearing, so that it's a strategy to not lose ourselves. And we've studied this, I'll briefly show you a slide with all the research. Our most recent study, one that just came out on this model was through the National Institute of Health, studied its own professionals and found high significance with mindful self-care after their intervention for self-care among their healthcare professionals, which I can share in the chat. We looked at African-American female activists and did an extensive qualitative study, and activist after activist after activist said, if I don't pause and care for myself, the fight's over. There'll be no one on the front line, right? And the same for women in academia and women in STEM. Like, if we get taken out, it's over, right? And so the self-care ends up being essentially, like Audre Lorde says, and it's a practice of activism to keep us there. So the model goes like this. There's the mindful self-care, right? That here is a sense of offering structure and predictability. Like I saw in the chat, if I give myself 20 minutes, I schedule this lunch on my walk, like it's scheduled. And in that moment at lunch, or in your 20 minutes, or in your, like, I get up at 5 a.m. and that's when I'm like, there's no one else awake almost in the whole world. And that's my time, right? And I'm in my yoga or my running and I'm doing my thing there, but that's mine. And that happens because I planned it. So scheduling pleasant events, scheduling self-care events in ahead of time. And then having a really solid set of being with and working with skills, which Tanya talked about those, and Lauren, like how do I have a set of allies and collaborators that I'm working with? How do I manage the moment? How can I be with my students? How can we be with each other? So a whole bunch of skills there, which are all learnable. And then looking past, this is the forgiveness, honoring your effort and struggle. Like, wow, I did not nail that. And looking forward with a sense of mission and purpose. Like, why am I here? Why do I need to take a break so I can continue this fight? Right. So that's the kind of the big plan. And then I think I'll end here. And there's so much more to say. I sometimes do like the whole day webinars on this. So, but that we can't give what we don't have. Like I always come back to that I can't give what I don't have. The talk I just gave on Monday for the embodiment conference was that embodiment and positive embodiment, which is the result of self-care, it actually is a fundamental human right. If you look at the Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, go through each one of them, right? Each article assumes embodiment, assumes this kind of ability to be in your body in a positive way. The 30th article, the final article, says no one can take your human rights away. And I'm like, they can, right? So we have to fight for that. And we can take it away from ourselves so easily, right? In our effort to almost fight for it for others or fight for women in academia or fight, we can self-abandon and abandon our own right. So I'll stop there, but that's like the essence of my team's work. I'm very passionate about self-care, actually.
One of the things I was wondering as you were sharing, Catherine, I know, Tanya and I talked a little bit about organizational structure and the, how people in different roles experience burnout. And I was wondering, with respect to your research and some of the work that you're doing, like, how do you either see that affecting higher education, or how do you hope, like, what types of changes would you hope to see in higher education?
Yeah, we're actually working on a companion scale called the collective care scale. That's about how am I working to shift the system. So by including classes, like our department's including classes on yoga for health and healing and the mindful therapist and self-care and service, I think by making that even part of the curriculum so that everyone's thinking about it, those courses are taken by lawyers, by occupational therapists, by educators, that I'm hoping to kind of train the next group, right, heading into the system to start a different way of thinking about it, like, and maybe scheduling into the system the kind of care, just like I think it was Tanya talked about it, starting a meeting with the check-in and connection, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's part of what we do now is we connect and care for each other as part of our practice, part of our work.
Yeah, and sometimes thinking about your circle of influence, right? And I know sometimes we try to think almost too big, like how can we change the system, where maybe it just comes from events like this and making connections and building that support network and kind of starting a movement.
Yeah, I think part of it, it's easy to devalue because we have our goals and we have, our professional dreams. We have our families, and we've studied all the way down to middle schoolers. People tend to have more compassion for others than they do for themselves. We tend to care, especially women, care for others more than we care for ourselves. And so the first thing to go is us. And what I'm suggesting is it's actually the last thing. Like we just have to desperately fight for it, for our own embodiment.
And if anyone has any questions, they can raise their hand or put them in the chat. But one of the things that we did want to do, because one of the things that we're hoping for is to help people meet other people and build relationships. And we did want to give everyone just a few minutes in a breakout room to talk a little bit about how they are experiencing burnout, or share some of the ways that they're trying to incorporate self-care into their day. And so what I will do is put everyone into a breakout room for about 5 minutes. and then we'll bring everyone back and just, take a minute to introduce yourself, share contact information, and just talk a little bit about, how you're experiencing burnout and maybe what's something you need and what's, something that you could offer to help someone else.
Hey, Patrice.
Yes.
Hi, it's Robin. Just want to say that I have to prep for another meeting, so I'm not going to do the breakout, and I am going to say goodbye. But do want to thank you for offering these sessions still with UB. It's really wonderful. So.
Oh, well, thanks. Thanks for joining. We'll have to find a time sometime to just catch up.
That would be good. That would be good. All right, take care.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, looks like. Looks like everyone is back. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed the time in the breakout room. And if you have any questions or anything else that you'd like to talk about, please put a note in the chat box, and we will be sharing out any slides and the recording. Becky will be sending those out to the listserv. And with that, I would just like to thank everyone for joining us today and spending time with us today. And to let you know that our next session is November 19th and same time, and we will be talking about recruitment, advisement, and creating community, how it has changed in 2020. And thinking about things like interviewing, advising, creating community, and how we're trying to navigate doing all of that remotely. And we will have joining us Alexis Stokes, who's the Director of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at the Harvard School of Engineering, and Nancy Campos, who's Director of Ellis AMP at SUNY New Paltz, and Simone Ragland and Betsy Rodriguez, who are at University at Buffalo, and also Tamara Hamilton. So we'll have a big group next time. And thank you especially to our speakers for taking the time to join us today. I know everybody has a lot going on, so we really appreciate the time that you spent with us today.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Lauren.
Good luck. Hope you get to go to Switzerland. I would love to be there.
Yeah.